let's look into the history of hardware architecture. So there was a single core era. What did it mean? So in this era, Moore's law was achieved by increasing the clock cycles. So that meant that your hardware performance automatically increased by every 2 years. So the applications that were running on that hardware inherently, increase the performance. So the application developers really did not have to think about increasing the performance of their application as such. So they were really, focused on the features or the functionalities. And now comes the multi-core era. So in multi-core era, your Moore's law is not achieved by increasing the number of clock cycles, but it is increased by the number of cores. So what does that mean? Your application running on such kind of hardware has to inherently improve its performance by means of concurrency or by means of parallelism. So if application developers are no longer, cannot seclude themselves from parallel programming or concurrent programming. It's no longer associated with academics or scientific computations. So if you look at this graph, so for past 25 years, this was the graph which had a slope, and this was the demon which was sleeping, the number of cores, and because of this demon now rising, you have all sorts of problems. So what's the problem now in the computing world? PPP, popular parallel programming. So this is the grand challenge that computing world is facing nowadays. So there's a lot of research going on in the industry as well as in the academia to figure out how this, as I showed, the demon is rising. So the problems that this demon is getting, how do we solve them? How do we tackle those challenges? So there's a lot of aspects, right from hardware till the to the OS to the application layer. But from the application perspective, this grand challenge, this research is trying to make parallel programming as easy as sequential programming. So application programmers really do not have to bother about the low-level constructs of multi-threading or concurrent programming. It aims to achieve Moore's laws of performance. That means your application performance should speed up 2 times a year, and eliminate the concurrency bugs. Now let's look into the history of software applications. So there was pre.com era. So in this era, you had standalone desktop applications. So you really did not have that. These applications really did not have the properties of distributed things or concurrent thing or parallel thing. And then came the .com era. So in .com era, you had websites. So these were mostly static web pages or mostly automated business processes. So what these applications did, they just took data from the application, dumped it into the database, and just put it back. Data was again controlled by the software vendor. So the application maker really knew how much of data he has. So the application that he made knew how much of processing it needs, how much of computing resources it needs. So it was like very very predictable thing. So these applications really did not have to bother much about scalability or distributed or parallelism or concurrency. And these were deployed in data centers, standalone servers, high-end servers in which it was deployed. So for some reason, if your application had to improve its performance or new features had to be added, you had to procure new hardware. So procurement of hardware took time. So that time actually gave the application developers the bandwidth to develop the features at ease. So, but today that is not the case. Your applications are deployed in the cloud, and procurement of computing resources is no more a challenge. So within a click of a button, you can get the resources. So application developers now do not have that bandwidth. So they have to be agile. They have to be, make applications as fast as possible. So then came the Web 2.0 era, the current era, the semantic web era. So where you had web applications or the network applications, which are not just dumb applications taking data from the user and dumping into the database and throwing it back, but they are smart apps. They do a lot of processing. They put in a lot of intelligence and give it to the user. So they are dynamic. The data that they produce is dynamic. And it is not controlled by the vendor, but it is controlled by the user. So you really can't predict how much of data your application will process. So you need to, your application should be scalable enough. And they are deployed on the cloud. So that brings to the some of the properties of modern day app. So scalability is one of them. Distributed, parallel and concurrent. They're dynamic, so they produce data which is not static but generated at runtime, and they keep on changing, like the Twitter stream or your Facebook notification or something of that sort. And they are agile. As I said, application developers do not have that bandwidth of the time that you had to have for the procurement hardware. That's gone. So you have to build code. You have to write code very fast. You have to be agile and you have to be sure. So you need the tools which will allow the application developers to inherently get these properties into their applications. So TypeSafe has the stack which actually gives you these properties. So how these properties are being achieved, I'll talk about that in the coming slides. So before that, let's look into parallelism and concurrency. So what's parallel programming? So parallel programming is like parallel execution of programs. Like if you have a big task and you break it into pieces and then execute them all at one go, so that your complete task execution is faster. So, but this cannot be done without a parallel hardware. You need to have multiple machines, or you need to have multiple resources, so that your subtasks can be computed at one go. So what parallelism makes, what parallel programming makes, it makes your programs faster. Concurrent programming, so simultaneous execution of programs. Some applications are inherently concurrent. For example, you have thousands of tweets coming in. So they all come at the same time. You don't have the control over it. And they can be performed without parallel hardware. Why? Because you can spawn multiple threads, and based on the time slice, you can give allocate resources to those threads, and you can process those requests that are coming in. But they won't get faster. The amount of time each request takes, it will remain the same. But your programs get more responsive, so your user experience gets better. So that's about concurrent programming. So there's one common thing between parallelism and concurrency, and that is they both are too hard. Why are they hard? That's because of the non-determinism. So today's concurrent programming model is like shared mutable data. So you have a mutable state which is shared across multiple threads. So and you do not know which thread will execute at what point of time. So that's where Heisenberg's uncertainty principle comes in, and you are not aware of how this state is going to behave, how your system is going to behave. So it's because of this non-determinism, it's hard. And also today's tools, for example Java, multi-threaded programming, you need to learn a lot of low-level constructs. You need to learn the memory model of your underlying runtime. You need to understand the different kinds of blocks that are there, just to safeguard. If there is a contention between two threads, you have to safeguard it, and you have to learn about a lot of blocks. Read blocks. Sometimes you'll read logs, sometimes you'll need write logs, sometimes you'll need read-write logs. So you have to think about a lot of cases, just because you have a mutable state. So non-determinism is essentially because of parallel processing plus mutable state. So what's the remedy? So as is a common adage, like prevention is better than cure. So all this problem that we get, all the problems today that the multi-threaded programming is facing is because of the mutable state. So avoid that mutable state. Just prevent it, and you'll get deterministic processing. So how is that possible? That's possible by programming functionally. So as Mohan had talked about the functional programming aspects, which supports immutability by itself. So you program functionally, and you will get the deterministic processing. So if you look into space versus time, this imperative way of programming and functional way of programming is like, in the imperative way of programming, you think in the dimension of time. So when you're doing something, you do at a particular time, and then you do something, and then you do something. So it follows one after the other. And the waves that you see are like threads. So if you have multiple threads there, these threads will have some contention among themselves. So because of those contentions, you'll again have to guard them. So and then the logs comes into picture, and then all the undeterministic Heisenberg principle comes into picture. And in the functional world, you think in the dimension of space. So it's like you build something and you build something else, and then you build something on top of that. So that's functional programming. So give an example. If you see how the modern day bridges are made. So there are the slab that is kept over the pillars is built somewhere else in a different space, and the pillars at the site, at the construction site, are constructed. And when they get constructed, you take the slab and put it over the pillars. So that's thinking in space. So the way the civil engineering guys, think in space and make their do their parallelism and make their bridges construction faster, we in the software world need to think in the same way. We need to think in space. We need to build blocks and build blocks on top of that. So now let's look into the three features that TypeSec provides. One is the Scala language, another is Akka, which is the middleware, and the Play framework, and how these helps you to get the properties of a modern day app, which I had listed here. So the scalability, distributed, and things. So I'll not go much into the properties of Scala, as Mohan had already talked about it. So just a quick review of it. So it's a hybrid language, functional as well as object-oriented. It's purely object-oriented. Everything in Scala is an object, be it primitive types, be it functions, be it anything. It has strong static typing. So unlike the normal function programming languages which are dynamic, wherein you cannot figure out the type conversion issues at compile time. In Scala, you can do that at compile time. So you catch type conversion bugs right at the compile time. They are easy. They are less expensive. So it's agile. So one of the properties of modern day app is like they are agile, and so you have to build your functionalities as fast as possible. So in Scala you have to write very less code and you can achieve a lot. So that gives you that agility that a modern day app needs to have. It has support for parallel as well as sequential programming. So as one of the properties of modern day app is parallelism and concurrency. So with Scala it's very easy to write parallel and concurrent code. So most of us are from Java background. So if you have a knowledge about C or C++, so what's the best thing that you liked about Java while moving from C, C++ into Java world?
No need to do any memory management.
Yeah, that is one. So how many of you had fears about pointer arithmetic?
Pointers, yeah, pointers is the second.
Yeah, so Java elevated all the fears of pointer arithmetic. So similarly, Scala will elevate all the fears of concurrent programming, multi-threaded programming. So it provides a better way of abstraction, so that you while writing multi-threaded code, you don't have to think about the low-level constructs. And Scala intermixes well with Java. So all your legacy code which is written in Java, you just don't have to throw it away just like that. You can still use it, and you can build on your application, new modules or new features in Scala. So what's there for parallelism in Scala? So just something which is not there. I'll talk about something which is not available in Java, which is something on top of Java. So it has something called parallel collections. So whenever you are writing a program, you mostly deal with collections. So parallel collections are intelligent collections. So they know that if they are executing on a multi-core hardware, they can perform their operations in a parallel way. So to give you an example, so here I have a list. I have a list here of numbers 1 to 1000. So I want to perform some kind of operation in this list. Let's say I want to add an integer 90. I have used thread.sleep here just to simulate the cost of this transform function. So essentially what I want to do is I want to take all the elements of this list and transform using this particular function. So if I had to do this in parallelly, let's say I want to have 10 threads. If I have a 10 core machine, so I want to break this list into 10 pieces, 100 integers of 100 integers a list, and then I want to perform the operation parallelly in 10 cores. So how would you do that in Java world? So you will spawn a lot of threads. You will spawn 10 threads, and then you will break the list, and then you will give it to those threads, and then you will get back and collaborate those individual results together. So how much time will that take for you to build such kind of thing here? Probably a day or two. But in case of Scala, all you need to do is you have to mention this par method. So the moment you call this par method, so this list is intelligent enough. This collection is intelligent enough to break it. All the functionality that I talked about. So I'll just run this code. You see the performance improvement here. Yeah. So you can see the improvement. So sequential mapping took around 10 seconds, and parallel mapping took there's an improvement of 5 times. So that's because I have 5 core machine. So that's the power of parallel collections. What you get in Scala. Very easy and very intuitive. So that were parallel collections. Then there's something called distributed collections. So your collections might not reside only inside the JVM on which your application is running, but that JVM can be on those collection can reside on a JVM which is running on a remote node as well. So that way you can manage some huge amount of data in your application. For concurrency, Scala have actor model. Just Mohan said like there's something called we have some language called Erlang. Erlang is very successful. It has a very good actor model, and it has been adopted in the telecom industry for 9 nines of availability. So Scala is inspired from that, and it has an actor model. So actor model is a different way of concurrent programming. It has STM, software transaction memory, as Mohan talked about it. So it's like similar to very much similar to the database transactions, and it also has futures. So all of this come bundled in a package called Akka. So I'll talk about Akka in further slides. So some of the properties of Scala, it's concise. You have to write less code. It has support for immutability as well as mutability. So you have 2 keywords here, var and var. Whenever you assign a variable, so you can have immutable variable or mutable variable. So val stands for immutable and var stands for mutable. You also have tuples and multiple assignments here. So people from Python background would know what tuples are. So if your function have to return more than one value, that's not possible in Java. So if you have to make that, you have to bundle all those things into a class. You have to write a different class, and then you have to pass all the variables, all the functions, all the values that are returning from the functions. So all of this redundant thing you don't need to do in Scala. So tuples and multiple assignments help you do that. So you also have operator overloading. People from C++, this is one thing which I missed in Java, which I liked about in C++, operator overloading. So Scala is giving that back. So that helps you to write more readable code, more expressive code. So how do you construct singleton objects in Java? You have to you make the constructor final, and then you have a factory method, and then you guard that factory method with synchronization so that multiple threads are coming. So you have to do all sorts of things. So you don't have to do it in Scala. All you need to use the object keyword. Just define your class with the keyword object, and you just don't have to think about all those synchronization issues and everything. So there is no static concept in Java. So you don't have the word static in keyword or static in Scala. So but then how do I have class-wide variables or class-wide methods? So for that, Scala has companion objects. So I'll just show a piece of code. So this is the companion object. So I have a class definition here, a person class. So if I have to have some kind of static methods or static variables, so I need to define another object called the companion object. So this companion object will have all the static or class, all the variables or all the methods that you want to share across all the instances of a class. You define it here, and you can use it the way you use it in Java. So you can say person dot class level method or person dot reference count. So that's how you achieve static things in Scala. Then type inference. So Scala is strongly statically typed. So every inference, the type of the variable is being determined at the compile time, and it's very intelligent. Scala compiler is very intelligent. You don't have to explicitly or redundantly type the types of the variables. Scala compiler will automatically infer it for you. And there's something called option T. So Mohan talked about null checks and the null pointer exception. So the null pointer exception is, there are a lot of jokes in the software developer community regarding to NPs, because those gives you, sleepless nights to the application developers. So just like you have checked exceptions in Java, which lets the client of your code at the compile time know about that there can be some kind of exception. So something similar you can do it for null values, which you don't get in Java. So you have something called option. So any code that you write or any function that you write where you expect that it can return you a null value, you return an option, and the caller of the code will by itself get to know that there can be a null, and he is forced to check the null thing. So the null check, he is forced to do it. So at compile time he knows that the code that he is calling or the API that he is calling can return null. So all the problems with NPs can be alleviated with this. So this is the class hierarchy of in Scala. So any is analogous to object. Any ref is for all the custom types that you have, and as in Scala, all the primitive types are also classes. So any val, all the primitive types derive from any val. So there's something new here in Scala. So there's a base class called nothing, which is base class of all the classes in Scala world. So you can pass this nothing object to all the functions, all the APIs that take any of the Java Scala classes. So moving on to the functional aspects, Scala functions are objects, so you can pass around functions, and you can construct functions with functions. So it has higher order functions. So I'll just give an example of how higher order function works. So you have to implement a library which actually implements summation. So summation of n or summation of n square or summation of n cube. So how do you do that programmatically? So I've defined a method summation which takes the limit, the lower limit and the upper limit, and it takes an operation. So this operation is a function which has input as an or argument as an integer, takes one argument which is integer and returns an integer. So and then it iterates through the lower limit to the upper limit, and then passes the whatever number you have to this operation, and adds on to the dumps it to the variable called result, and finally returns the result. So one interesting thing to notice here is what this function is returning. So there is no return keyword here. So the last in Scala functions, the last expression is the returning expression, returning result. So here result is what is being returned by this function summation. And then I define square, I define cube, which has the same semantics as this particular operation is. And then finally I call summation 1 to 5 square. So this gives me summation of n square. This gives me summation of n cube. So the benefit here is you don't have to write the code which actually iterates to the list. So if you look into any Java code base, you'll find 50 to 60% of the code is for the iteration over the collections. So with this higher order function abstraction, you can imagine the amount of code that you can reduce. Then there's something called partially applied functions. So I'll just take an example. So I have a function called format time, which takes two string as parameters, and it just concatenates and sends you back. So if I have to have times like this 10:10 a.m. or 10:20 a.m. or 10:30 a.m. So I have to call format time with a.m. 3 times. So if I have to have it n times, so I have to pass that a.m. on every time. So but that's like writing redundant code. So what do I do instead of calling it passing am every time? So I create another function out of this function, passing the second value as am, and I use a wildcard here. So this am now becomes a function which takes a string and whose second parameter is always am, and then I call am time. So this internally will call format time. When you call am time, it will internally call format time with second value as am. So that's how you can you can get the agility part of the modern day app. So you write less and you get more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a way where we can set up a default value in case a value is not passed?
Yeah, you can do that. I know if you know about Python, so in Python you can mention the default value. So the advantage here over that is like when you say a default value, so you just cannot change that at runtime. But in this case, you can change it at runtime, and with partially applied function, you can change it at runtime. The default value can change, and then you construct another function out of that existing function. So traits, it's similar to inheritance interface in Java. So I'll not talk much about it because Mohan had already talked about it. I'll just show an example of where this can be useful. So in modern day application development, we use TDD, test driven development. So wherein we need to have unit tests written. So there are cases when we want to test the behavior of our class. So what we do, but this class is actually using some external objects or external APIs. So we don't really want to test external API, but we want to test our behavior of our class. So in those cases, what we do, we actually mock the external APIs that we are using. So Scala traits, gives you that functionality. You don't really have to depend on any other mocking framework to get that mocking functionality. With traits, you can achieve it very easily. So so I have an application class here, which takes an interface, which takes a variable called HTTP, which is an interface, and it has another variable called say Twitter. And there are two methods here. So the first method one, it just takes a boolean value, and if it is true, it just does HTTP put, or else it does get. So let's look into this interface IHTTP. So it's a trait. So it has two values, put and get. Those are unimplemented. So you implement that in the HTTP IMPL class. So put is defined as an actual put, or get is defined as actual get. Now I want to test my application class. So for that I need to mock this HTTP API. So I create a trait called mock HTTP, which extends the actual HTTP interface, and I override those methods, the methods that I want to mock. So I have overwritten them and mocked it. So now I create a HTTP variable, instantiate an HTTP variable, and I mix in with the mock HTTP. So what this will do is, so it will override the implementation of this HTTP IMPL class with whatever definition it is there in the mock HTTP. And then I pass this particular mock HTTP into my application class. And if I try to run it, so you'll see that all the test cases passed. So I used here mock put passing as true. So true actually got called the put method of the HTTP interface. So now this particular application class has been mocked with the HTTP IML property that it has. So this with Mixins, with threads, you can actually achieve the mocking functionality that you want when you're doing TDD. Type inference. So there could be ways, could be areas where you want to convert one type into another. So in Java world, how do? You write conversion functions. Let's say you want to convert integer into string. So you'll write a function called into string, and then you'll pass integer, take an integer variable, and then you'll do toString or whatever processing you want to do inside your method, and then do it. So every time you want to have this kind of conversion, you have to call this particular function. So that's like redundancy. So in Scala, you just define that particular conversion function with the implicit keyword. So what that Scala compiler will do, so whenever there is a, if you are assigning, taking this example of integer to string. So if you are calling any method of string on an integer, and in that scope, if you have imported that particular implicit conversion method, so Scala compiler will automatically or implicitly convert that integer into a string. So you don't have to call that method every time. So that's like reducing the code. So a few of the properties of Scala collections, you have immutable and mutable collections both. Immutable are helpful for functional style of programming or to get rid of that mutable state. So it has some of the predefined methods: filter, map, fold left, and fold right. So I'll, in the interest of time, I'll not get into the details of that. Scala pattern matching. So it's very similar to advanced. It's like advanced switch case. So in Java switch cases, you earlier used to have, before Java 7, you could only have integers for switch cases. But in Java 7, you could do with strings. But it's Scala, you can do it for everything. So it can be for littles, constants. You can have wildcards. You can do it with tuples, and then you can also guard that. You also can have regular expressions in your switch cases. So I'll just give an example how pattern matching works. So I have a method called AnyMatch, which takes a variable of type any. Any is like the superclass of everything. And then I have a case here. I match it, and I have a case here with a tuple. So and this tuple is, first two elements are integer, and the third one is string. So if you pass any match string here, it will go to this. If you pass 1 to 3, where will it go? It will go here, the wildcard, because it doesn't match with any of these. And when I say any match 300, so it will come here, because I have guarded this case with, whatever variable I have getting here, the integer variable should be greater than 100. So it comes here. So that's the richness of Scala pattern matching. So Scala concurrency. So there is something called actor method, which is defined in the actor trait of Scala, which takes a function or a closure, and it is helpful for writing concurrent code. So if we want to have some code which has to be run in a different thread, so you call this actor and pass that function, whatever function you want to execute in a different thread. So you just call this method. You don't have to bother about creating the threads or managing the thread. So that kind of abstraction is provided by Scala actor. So to give an example, so this is here I have called this actor method with this pass this closure to it, and this piece of code will be executed in a different thread. So if I run this, So I have three statements here, actor sleeping, actor waking, and the main thread. So you can see this was printed, had it been sequentially, then you would have actor sleeping printed first, but main thread is being printed first. That means the block of code inside the actor was executed on a different thread. So that's how it's very easy to spawn out different threads and execute your some part of code in different threads. So you also have actor class. So sometimes you want to manage your execution of program in a distributed fashion. So in that you need to define some your custom defined actor classes. So you can define those as well. Then you have this receive method. So if I go back to that example, not this one, a different example. So I have a ping pong application here. So I have two actors. One is ping, another is pong. So pong is this, and both are actors, and they receive messages. They are live objects, just like in the real world you have live objects which can listen to somebody communicate somebody else's communication. So it can receive messages. So it can take pong. This ping character can take pong and stop, and pong can take ping and stop. So you define this receive code here. So this actor model is very good or very well proven for concurrent programming. So if you had to write this kind of application, ping pong application in using Java threads, you would have used wait notify protocol, and then you would have had a some kind of common object shared between the two, and you would have some locks between the two, and then using wait notify protocol you would have implemented this. So that would have taken around a day or two for anybody to implement. But with this, it's very easy to write, very intuitive to write. So you just define two actor classes, and then you define the messages that it can respond to, and then you finally pass the just message. So here I am creating instances of these two actors, and then I start them. So the moment you start them, the actor system will, the Scala has something called actor system. Actor system is a system or a small runtime which manages all the actors that are running in that particular application. So when you do start, so this the actor that you have defined becomes a live object, and start is ready to receive messages. And then here I send a message pong.ping, and everything starts triggered. So that's very easy way of writing. Wherever you want to have some kind of communication between two threads, use actors, and it's very easy to write. So one thing to notice here is the receive method. So this is the method which is executed in a different thread. So whenever actor gets a message, the actor system will actually assign some resources to the this particular actor, and that resources will be used to execute whatever piece of code that you have written inside the receive method. But with receive, what happens is, whenever this actor will come across receive, whatever thread it has accumulated or it has got from the actor system, it will block it. It will not release it until this actor is stopped. So that is like inefficient way of resources. So because if this actor is not getting any messages further, so it has blocked one thread, which is, we don't want to do that. So in that case, you use React. So that's React is helpful in that. So if that helps you to efficiently use your resources. So the moment you have React, so when the block inside the React is completed, whatever thread that particular actor had, it will release it immediately. So then that helps you have your resource utilization better. So now let's talk something about Akka. So Akka is a middleware which helps you to write concurrent, scalable, and fault-tolerant method. It's inspired from, as I said earlier, inspired from Erlang's actor model. It's based on actor model. It's highly performant, so it can scale well. It can scale within your system, within your multi-core. If you have multi-core hardware, it can scale inside your hardware, or it can scale in some remote nodes as well. It's event-driven, so completely asynchronous. So you don't have anything blocking anywhere. So your programs are more responsive since it's event driven, it's asynchronous. And it has support for location transparency. As I said, you can have actors in remote nodes and then you can communicate with them as well. So actor system, as I said, it's a small runtime running inside, which manages all the actors that are there inside the that particular runtime. Supervision model. So it's the supervision model is derived, or it is analogous to what we have in real life. So you'll have this manager subordinate level relationship model in real time. So anything goes wrong with the subordinate, or anything the subordinate makes some mistake, it is the job of, or it is the responsibility of the the supervisor to correct it or to take remedial action. So this model is inspired, or the philosophy is let it fail. So no matter what, how much you try, your application will fail at some point of time. So instead of you guarding against failures, or you spending time on explicitly spending time on guarding against the failures, so it says let it fail, and all your remedy, or all your guarding thing, or all your failure cases are taken care by the supervisor. So it separates out the it abstracts out the actual logic and the failure logic, so that you can enhance your failure logic as and when you encounter more failures or something of that sort. So it also has lifecycle monitoring. So lifecycle monitoring is like from the start of an actor till the end of the death of an actor, you can monitor this. Your supervisors can monitor it. You can configure it that way. So that's the supervision hierarchy. So in the interest of time, I'll just quickly go through it, and I'll talk something a little bit about Play. So you must have heard about Node.js. So how many of you have heard of Node.js? So why Node.js is, what is the USP of Node.js?
Concurrency, migration.
What else? It's the asynchronicity, which is I think the USP of it. So it's completely it's non-blocking. So nothing blocks. So whatever you do, it's asynchronous with callbacks and all. So that's the kind of thing you get in Play as well. So everything in Play is asynchronous, or it has very good support for asynchronous. So any kind of blocking calls or expensive calls that you want to have in your application, you can do it asynchronously, so that your application is more responsive and more concurrent. So it has Ruby on Rails like agility. It is based on convention over configuration. It seamlessly integrates with Akka, so that is for scalability thing. And it has hot deployment. So you just you edit your code, edit your Scala code, or edit your Java code, and you refresh your button in your browser, and everything, all the changes get reflected immediately. So that's a feature you have in Play. So it has good, out of the box setup for unit and functional testing. So for web application testing, we generally use Selenium or some other framework to test it. So Play has inbuilt functionality, so you can seamlessly integrate your testing along with your application development. As I said, asynchronicity is there. It has also support for WebSocket. So current modern day application will have a lot of there will be notifications sent from the server to the client, just like notification you get in Facebook or the Twitter stream that you get. So you can write such kind of applications very easily with the APIs that it provides. It also has inbuilt cache support. So caching is something which any of the modern day application will need. So you have some inbuilt cache APIs as well in Play, so you can use that for caching purposes. Integrated JSON and XML handling APIs. So yeah, progressive scheme processing. So this is the last thing that I want to talk about, and this is the most interesting thing that I find in Play, is the iterates. So what iterates are basically, so if you all must be knowing about iterator. So iterator are used to enumerate or iterate through a collection. What if this collection is not fixed? What if this collection can keep on increasing? It's not fixed. So in those cases, you use iterates. So iterates are very similar to iterators, with some extra functionalities that it can iterate through progressive data that are coming. And iterates are the consumers of data. Enumerators are the producer of the data. So enumerators can produce chunk of data, in progressive manner. And what enumeraties are? Enumeraties, like you might want to convert one kind of data stream to another kind of data stream to process it. So enumeraties comes into picture there. So you can convert one kind of progressive stream, let's say some kind of string streams that you're getting. You want to convert it to integer. So you place enumeraties in between. So all the mapping will be done by this enumerity from integer to string to integer. So that's the APIs that you get in play for progressive stream processing. So with that, I conclude my presentation.